The street was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens in the dead of night. The sound of distant traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze were the only noises breaking the silence. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, a lone figure stood, arms crossed, his face hidden in the shadows. The world around him seemed to have slowed down, as if it, too, was holding its breath. He wasn't expecting this. Not in a million years. It happened in an instant. A flash of movement, sharp and aggressive. A police officer, tall and built like a wall of muscle, lunged forward, his baton swinging with incredible speed. There was no warning. No shout. Just a brutal crack as the officer's weapon connected with the man's back. A gasp echoed through the street. The officer stepped back, eyes wide in disbelief, but the man didn't move. The crowd, frozen in place, couldn't quite grasp what had just occurred. The baton had struck with force, but the man hadn't flinched. No sign of pain, no grimace, no struggle. It was as if he had expected it, as if he had known this moment would come. The officer stood there, his breath heavy, unsure of what to do next. His eyes flickered nervously, darting between the man he had just struck and the crowd that was now starting to gather. He could feel their eyes on him, could sense the tension in the air. But the man? He remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the officer. "Get out of here, man," someone from the crowd shouted, a voice breaking through the shock and silence. The officer's hand tightened around the baton. The crowd was starting to stir, murmurs of confusion and anger beginning to fill the air. But still, the man did not move. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, as if unbothered by the blow. His eyes locked onto the officer's with an intensity that was almost unnerving. The officer felt a chill run down his spine, a sinking feeling he couldn't explain. He had expected the man to retaliate, to yell or run. He had expected anything but this calm. "I didn't mean," the officer's voice faltered, his words trailing off. But the man didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to silence the officer. The streetlights above flickered, casting strange shadows on the ground as the officer's mind raced. He had seen violence before, he had been on the force long enough to know how quickly a situation could escalate. But this felt different. This was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The man's face remained expressionless, his features hard to read. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was composed. Too composed. Almost as if he had been through something far worse than a simple baton strike. A low murmur spread through the crowd. People began to record, pulling out their phones and whispering to one another. The situation was already beginning to go viral. The officer could feel it, this wasn't just any minor confrontation. This was a moment that would be dissected, shared, and debated across the world. But none of that mattered. Not right now. Right now, the officer needed to figure out what to do. His hand was still gripping the baton, but the anger that had fueled him earlier was fading, replaced by a strange unease. He had made a mistake. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. But how? Why? The man took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The officer tensed, unsure of what to expect next. Would the man fight back? Would he lash out in anger? Instead, the man's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. "You shouldn't have done that." The words were simple, but they sent a jolt through the officer. There was no fear in the man's voice, no threat. Just a calm certainty, as if he knew something the officer didn't. The officer's grip on the baton loosened, his hand shaking. The crowd was watching him now, every eye trained on the moment that would define him. The man's gaze didn't waver, still fixed on the officer, and for the first time that night, the officer felt small. I didn't mean to," the officer stammered again, his voice barely above a whisper. But the man didn't respond. Instead, he turned, slowly walking away from the officer and the gathering crowd. A mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief filled the officer's chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had been in tense situations before, but this felt different. The man was walking away, not even bothering to look back. The officer stared at his baton, the weight of it suddenly feeling much heavier in his hand. He was frozen, unsure of what to do next. It wasn't just that the man had remained calm in the face of violence, it was the way he had said those words. "You shouldn't have done that." Like it was a warning, like he knew what was coming. A strange sense of dread settled over the officer. But before he could react, a voice from the crowd called out, "He's not just anyone. You've messed with the wrong person." The officer turned sharply, his eyes searching the crowd. The man was already out of sight, but the weight of the statement lingered in the air. The crowd had seen something he hadn't. They knew something he didn't. The officer's pulse quickened as he realized just how deep this moment ran. He had no idea who that man was or why he hadn't reacted. The officer had expected the situation to end with a scuffle, maybe a brief arrest, but it had spiraled out of control in a way he couldn't comprehend. The crowd was still whispering, murmuring amongst themselves, but the officer didn't hear them. His mind was elsewhere, on the man who had walked away, unfazed by the violence that had just unfolded. There was more to this story than anyone could have guessed. He could feel it in his bones. But the man was gone now, swallowed by the night. The officer was left standing alone, surrounded by an audience of curious onlookers who had witnessed something they would never forget. The officer didn't know it yet, but this incident would set off a chain of events that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew. What had he just done? And more importantly, who was that man? As the night wore on, and the crowd slowly dispersed, the officer couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a mistake, one that would haunt him forever. Something told him that the consequences of this moment had only just begun. The man's quiet warning echoed in his mind, "You shouldn't have done that." But it was too late to take it back now. The night after the encounter with the police officer, the city had returned to its usual rhythm. The streets were alive with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional chatter of late-night revelers. But for the officer, the events from the previous evening had left an imprint on his mind that wouldn't fade. The strike with the baton, the strange, unflinching calm of the man, he couldn't shake it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's gaze. Those piercing eyes, full of something the officer couldn't quite place. Was it wisdom? A warning? A challenge? It wasn't just the incident that haunted him. It was the way the crowd had reacted. People weren't just passive bystanders. They had recognized something the officer hadn't. They were whispering among themselves, their eyes filled with a quiet knowing that seemed far too deep for a random encounter on a quiet street. The officer couldn't stop asking himself, who was that man? The next day, he found himself back at the precinct, sitting in a small, sterile room filled with the usual humdrum of police work. Yet, his mind was miles away, tangled in thoughts of the stranger he had struck the night before. He kept replaying the scene in his head, each detail now burned into his memory. "You all right, Johnson?" his partner, Officer Harris, asked, pulling him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, one eyebrow raised in concern. She'd known him long enough to see when something was off. Johnson sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Yeah, just tired." "Come on. I know you better than that. You've been distracted all morning. What's going on?" Harris stepped inside, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. Johnson hesitated, unsure whether to bring it up. The last thing he wanted was to seem paranoid or overdramatic, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Harris, I think I messed up last night." Harris raised an eyebrow. "You? Messed up? That's a first. It's not like that. It's this guy I hit with the baton." Johnson paused, his voice trailing off as he tried to find the right words. "I don't know, something was off about him." Harris's interest piqued. Off? What do you mean? Johnson stood up, pacing the small room. I don't know. The way he didn't react, the way he looked at me. Like he knew something I didn't. He didn't even seem fazed. Like he was, waiting for something to happen. I don't know how to explain it. Harris thought for a moment. So you hit a guy with a baton and he didn't fight back. That's weird, I'll give you that. But I'm not sure it's enough to get yourself worked up over, right? Johnson shook his head. It's not just that. It's everything around it. The crowd, the way they whispered. The guy, he seemed different, like he wasn't afraid of anything. Like he was already thinking 5 steps ahead. Harris considered his words carefully. Maybe you're reading too much into it. I mean, it was a stressful night. And you're usually pretty good under pressure. Yeah, maybe. But I can't shake this feeling. I think there's more to this than just some random guy. He's not who he seems to be. Johnson's voice was low, almost to himself, but Harris heard the uncertainty in it. She walked closer, laying a hand on his shoulder. Okay, Johnson, I'll bite. What do you think's going on? Johnson hesitated, then spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I've just started something. Something big. And I don't know if I can stop it. The days passed, but the unease Johnson felt never went away. He found himself looking over his shoulder, constantly wondering when the next move would come. He kept trying to convince himself it was nothing. Just an odd encounter, nothing more. But deep down, he knew it was far from that. Meanwhile, the man he had struck the night before was nowhere to be found. The news reports had made brief mention of the incident, but there were no leads, no updates, no interviews with witnesses. It was as if the entire event had been swept under the rug. But Johnson wasn't the only one who couldn't forget. The following week, something unexpected happened. Johnson was sitting at his desk when a message popped up on his computer screen. It was from an anonymous account. No name, no number, just a cryptic message. You've made a mistake. There's more to this than you know. Johnson's heart raced. His hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond, if at all. He stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, the words echoing in his mind. Could it be? Could it be the man from that night, reaching out to him? How could he have found out about this? Johnson had no answers, just a deep sense of foreboding. He couldn't ignore it. He typed back cautiously, "Who is this? What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly, "You don't understand yet, but you will. The clock is ticking. The world is about to change. You've been marked." Johnson's mind raced. Marked? What the hell did that mean? Before he could reply, another message appeared. The truth is coming. And when it does, you won't be able to hide. The screen went blank. A cold sweat broke out on Johnson's brow. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just some prank. This was real. Someone was watching him, and whatever had happened the night of the strike was far from over. He sat back in his chair, hands trembling. What did he do now? Who could he trust? Harris. She was the only one he could turn to. But how could he explain this? How could he tell her that the strange man from the night before had somehow found a way to contact him, warning him of something? Johnson grabbed his phone and dialed her number. "Harris," he said when she picked up. "I need you to meet me. Now." They met at a small coffee shop later that afternoon. Harris arrived first, looking skeptical but concerned. "All right, Johnson. What's this all about?" she asked, sliding into the booth opposite him. "I've been getting messages," Johnson blurted out. "I think it's from the guy I hit." Harris leaned forward. "Messages? From him? How?" I don't know. It's anonymous. But they're unsettling. He's warning me, Harris. He says something's coming. And that I've been marked. Harris sat back, taking in his words. Marked? This sounds like some kind of joke. Or maybe you're just not thinking clearly. But Johnson wasn't so sure. No, Harris. This feels real. And I don't know what to do. Harris thought for a moment, then said, okay, let's start from the beginning. You hit this guy, and now you're getting cryptic messages. Is there any chance at all, that you might be overreacting? Johnson shook his head. I wish I could say I was. But this doesn't feel like just some random event. There's something else at play here, and I'm in the middle of it. Just then, Johnson's phone buzzed again. His heart skipped a beat. Another message. He opened it quickly. It's too late. The pieces are already in motion. You won't escape what's coming. Johnson stared at the screen, the words chilling him to his core. What had he gotten himself into? And how could he stop it before it was too late? The sense of dread continued to grow. The officer knew he couldn't back out now. Whatever this was, it was already bigger than him. And the truth was lurking just beyond the edge of his understanding. Something was coming, and it was heading straight for him. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to face it alone. The story was just beginning to unravel. And with each passing day, the mystery grew deeper. But so did the danger. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and unease. Officer Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, followed by a presence he couldn't explain. The cryptic messages continued, arriving at odd hours, always unsigned, always unsettling. Each time he read one, a wave of dread washed over him. They weren't just warnings, they were threats wrapped in mystery, pushing him closer to the edge of something much bigger than he could have imagined. The officer had tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. After all, who would go to such lengths to threaten someone over a simple altercation? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized, this wasn't about him. This was about something far deeper, something hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The first clue. It was a cold, gray morning when the first real clue came. Johnson had spent the night tossing and turning, plagued by thoughts of the mysterious man he had struck, the cryptic messages, and the words that seemed to haunt him, "You've been marked." He had no idea what it meant, but deep down, he felt that it was something far more dangerous than he could comprehend. The coffee shop he visited every morning was quiet, just a few early risers and the usual hum of machinery in the background. As he sat down with his coffee, his phone buzzed, vibrating on the table in front of him. He picked it up, eyes scanning the screen. It was another message from the anonymous account. "They're coming for you." This time, the message was accompanied by a picture, a blurry photo of a street corner, the one where Johnson had struck the man with the baton. It was taken from a distance, as if someone had been watching the entire scene unfold. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. It sent a chill down his spine. His hands shook as he stared at the image. How had they known? How had they captured that moment? He didn't even remember seeing anyone else around, but now he realized, someone had been watching from the shadows. He quickly scanned his surroundings. Was anyone watching him now? Could they be watching him? His mind raced, heart pounding in his chest. He snapped out of his panic and pulled up the contact list on his phone. There was only one person he trusted enough to talk about this. He dialed Harris's number. She picked up on the first ring. "What's going on, Johnson? You sound off." "I just got a message," he said, his voice low. "They sent me a picture of the scene where I hit the guy. I'm telling you, someone's been watching us. I think they know everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right, calm down. I need you to explain everything. Now." Johnson quickly told her about the latest message, the eerie photograph, and the strange sense of being watched. Harris listened intently, her voice calm but firm as she processed the information. "We need to meet," she said. "This is serious. I'll call in a favor. We need to find out who's behind this, and why they're targeting you. The investigation begins." The meeting between Johnson and Harris was tense. Harris had managed to pull some strings to get access to surveillance footage from nearby cameras, hoping to find something that could explain the mysterious situation. But after hours of searching, they came up with nothing. The footage from the night of the incident was either too blurry or too distorted. It was as if the very cameras were part of a bigger plan to hide the truth. "This is insane," Harris muttered, rubbing her temples in frustration. "How is this even possible?" Johnson's mind raced. There had to be something they were missing. The man he had struck, there was something about him that didn't sit right. The man had known something, and now it felt like the entire world was part of a puzzle that Johnson couldn't solve. "I don't understand. It's like they've erased any trace of him," Johnson said, more to himself than to Harris. "Well, we know one thing," Harris replied, looking up at him. "This isn't random. Someone's orchestrating all of this. And they're good at it." Johnson nodded. "But who? And why?" They both fell into a long silence. Harris was the first to speak. "Listen, Johnson," she said, her voice serious. "We need to dig deeper. There's got to be something else. The way this guy didn't react when you hit him, it's like he was expecting it. It's almost like he's not even afraid." Johnson clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. He knew she was right. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing a piece of the puzzle, something huge that he hadn't seen yet. The first revelation. The days following their meeting were filled with more cryptic messages, but none of them provided the clarity Johnson needed. Each message pushed him further down a rabbit hole, deeper into a web of lies, manipulation, and secrets. But the breakthrough came when he stumbled across an old file in the precinct's database. It was buried deep in the archives, long forgotten by most of the officers. But when Johnson saw the name on the file, his heart skipped a beat. The file was about a man named Malik Al-Fayed, a former informant with ties to organized crime in the city. Malik had vanished years ago, presumed dead after a botched operation. His disappearance had been written off as just another casualty of the job. But the file didn't sit right with Johnson. The details didn't match the official story. Malik had been too smart, too careful. He wouldn't have just disappeared without a trace. Johnson's fingers trembled as he opened the file. Inside, there were pages of notes, old photographs, and surveillance reports. The further he read, the more he realized, Malik had been involved in something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The man had connections to underground networks, hidden organizations, and shadowy figures who operated outside the law. And in the margin of one of the final pages, a name was scribbled in red ink, the Watchers. Johnson felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know who these Watchers were, but they seemed to be everywhere. In the shadows. Watching. Listening. Pulling the strings. His phone buzzed again, interrupting his thoughts. Another message. "You're getting closer. But you're too late." Johnson's breath caught in his throat. Who were these people? What was happening to him? The danger escalates. The next few days were a blur of frustration and confusion. Johnson couldn't stop thinking about the file, about Malik Al-Fayed, and about the strange messages that kept appearing on his phone. Every time he thought he was close to figuring it out, something new would surface, something even more mysterious. The more he investigated, the more he realized just how deep this ran. He couldn't trust anyone, not even Harris. She was the only one he had confided in, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about her. Could she be involved in this? Was she working with whoever was pulling the strings? His paranoia began to mount. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, late one night, as he sat at home, the knock on his door came. It was sharp. Loud. Johnson's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not at this hour. He approached the door cautiously, his hand resting on the sidearm holstered under his jacket. He peered through the peephole. No one was there. Confused, he opened the door slowly, only to find a small package on the doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. His hands shook as he picked it up. Inside, there was a single, folded piece of paper. Johnson opened it carefully, his breath catching in his throat when he read the words. "The truth is closer than you think. But once you find it, there's no going back." The days after the mysterious package arrived were a blur of unease and confusion. Officer Johnson couldn't escape the feeling that everything in his life had taken a turn into the unknown. He kept replaying the words written on that piece of paper, "The truth is closer than you think. But once you find it, there's no going back." He didn't know what to make of it. The cryptic warning only deepened the pit in his stomach. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered, yet every answer led to more questions. His investigation into the mysterious figure who had been watching him, the man he had struck with the baton, had become an obsession. But what he didn't know was that someone, or something, was pulling the strings, orchestrating every move. And now, Johnson was a pawn in a game much bigger than he could ever have imagined. A meeting in the dark. It was late when Johnson received a call. The city was quiet, save for the occasional hum of passing traffic, and he was about to call it a night when his phone buzzed on the table. The name that appeared on the screen made his blood run cold: Harris. "Johnson," she said on the other end, her voice strained. "We need to meet. I've found something." Johnson felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Harris had been the only person he could trust. But after everything that had happened, the cryptic messages, the warnings, the mysterious figure, it was becoming harder to tell who he could rely on. "Where?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Avenue. It's the only place I trust right now. I'll explain everything when you get here. Come alone." Before he could respond, Harris hung up. Johnson stared at the phone in his hand, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Something was happening. Something bigger than him, something he couldn't control. But he had to know what it was. The warehouse. The warehouse stood on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a rundown industrial district. It had been abandoned for years, the windows shattered, the doors rusted, and the walls covered in layers of grime. It looked like a place that time had forgotten. Johnson pulled up to the entrance, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The place was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of a distant generator. He parked his car, his senses on high alert, and slowly got out. His hand hovered near the weapon holstered at his side. The last time he had stepped into a situation like this, things had gone sideways. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he had to be prepared. As he stepped into the shadows, a figure emerged from the dark. It was Harris, her face tight with worry, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if she expected someone, or something, to jump out at any moment. "You made it," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Come on. We don't have much time." Johnson followed her into the warehouse. The inside was dimly lit, filled with the scent of mildew and rust. Dust hung in the air, and the floor creaked with every step they took. Harris led him toward the back, where a small, makeshift desk was set up with papers scattered across it. She gestured for him to sit, and he obeyed, his mind racing with questions. "What is all this, Harris? What's going on?" Johnson asked, his voice thick with frustration. Harris looked around again, making sure they weren't being watched. She sat down across from him, her fingers trembling as she sifted through the papers on the desk. "I've been looking into everything, Johnson," she said quietly. "The guy you hit, Malik Al-Fayed, he's not just some random street thug. He was involved in something much bigger than that." Johnson leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Harris took a deep breath. Malik was part of a secret network, an underground organization that operates outside the law. They have ties to everything: corporations, politicians, law enforcement. They control everything from the shadows. Johnson's heart skipped a beat. "Wait. Are you saying that Malik was part of a criminal syndicate? Is that what you've been digging into?" "Not just a criminal syndicate," Harris replied, her eyes darkening. "It's much worse than that. This network has infiltrated every level of society, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. They're not just criminals, they're a shadow government, a force that manipulates everything. And they're known as the Watchers." The Watchers. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The Watchers. Johnson had seen that name in Malik's file, but now it was becoming clear that the name represented something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. "Who are they? What do they want?" Johnson asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. Harris leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "That's the problem. We don't know exactly who they are or what they want. But we know they've been controlling events from the shadows for years. Malik was involved with them, but he broke away. He tried to expose them, tried to leak information. That's why he disappeared." Johnson's mind was racing. "So, this has been going on for years? And you think that's why I'm being targeted?" Harris nodded. "Exactly. The Watchers have their eyes on you now, Johnson. They know you're getting too close to the truth. They've been watching every move you make. They know about the Baton strike. They know you're digging into Malik's disappearance. And now, they're trying to shut you down." Johnson stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "No. I won't back down. I need to know the truth, Harris. I need to understand what's going on." Harris reached out to stop him. "You don't understand, Johnson. It's not that simple. These people, the Watchers, they're dangerous. They don't just control information. They control people. They have eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets. If they think you know too much, they'll come for you." Johnson felt a rush of adrenaline. His body was tense, his mind sharp with determination. "I can't just walk away from this, Harris. I've come too far. I'm already in this." She looked at him for a long moment, her face conflicted. Finally, she sighed. "All right. But we need to be careful. We need to move quickly, get all the information we can, and expose them before they can do anything else." The hidden agenda. For the next few days, Johnson and Harris worked in secret, digging into every lead they could find. They uncovered evidence of the Watchers' influence, cryptic files, hidden networks, and shadowy connections that spanned across the city. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the waters became. But as they got closer to the truth, something else began to happen. Someone was tracking their every move. They were no longer just trying to uncover the truth. They were being hunted. One night, as they were reviewing documents in the warehouse, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. "Get down," Harris whispered urgently, pulling Johnson to the floor. They huddled together in the darkness, barely breathing as the footsteps grew closer. Johnson's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the realization that they had been found. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and a shadow loomed in the doorway. For a moment, everything was still, as if time had frozen. Then the voice came, low, menacing, familiar. "You're digging in the wrong place, Johnson. Johnson's heart raced as he lay in the shadows, barely breathing. The voice that had echoed in the darkness wasn't just a random threat. It was familiar. It was cold. It was the voice of someone who knew him, a voice that sent a chill through his spine. "You're digging in the wrong place, Johnson." The words rang in his ears, each syllable sharp like a dagger. The shadow in the doorway loomed, and for a moment, Johnson could only stare. He could barely make out the figure's features, but there was no mistaking the menacing tone of the voice. It was then that Johnson's mind snapped back into focus. Whoever it was, they knew exactly who he was. They knew about the investigation, about the secrets he was uncovering. They knew everything. He motioned for Harris to stay low, his fingers moving like lightning to retrieve his sidearm. His pulse pounded in his ears, each beat feeling louder than the last. Harris's eyes were wide with panic, but she trusted him. She had to. This was their only chance. With a slow, deliberate motion, Johnson rose from the floor, careful not to make a sound. He peered around the edge of a rusted steel beam and caught a glimpse of the intruder, tall, dressed in black, and standing at the entrance. The figure stepped inside, scanning the room with precision. Whoever they were trained. And they weren't here to talk. The confrontation. The figure took one more step forward, and the floorboards creaked beneath their boots. Harris's hand tightened on Johnson's arm, her whisper barely audible. "What do we do?" Johnson didn't have time to think. He motioned for her to stay quiet and moved toward the back door. Their only option was to escape before the figure got any closer. But before they could make their move, the figure spoke again, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "I'm not here to hurt you, yet." Johnson froze, his breath caught in his throat. The words were chilling, but they only served to confuse him further. What did he mean by, "yet"? Was this a warning or an attempt to throw him off? "We both know why you're here, Johnson," the voice continued. "You're too close to the truth. And that's a dangerous place to be." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Johnson's mind raced. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears as the figure took another step forward, closer to where he and Harris were hiding. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Then, with a sudden motion, the man turned sharply, his footsteps fading into the distance. Johnson waited, unsure of what to do. Should he follow? Confront him? Or was this another trap? Before he could decide, Harris's voice broke through the silence. "Johnson, we have to move. We can't stay here." Without another word, Johnson grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back door. They couldn't risk staying in the warehouse any longer. They needed to get to safety, figure out who the intruder was, and what it all meant. The escape. They bolted out of the warehouse into the night, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The city streets were deserted, bathed in the glow of flickering streetlights. Johnson's eyes darted around, every shadow feeling like a potential threat. He had no idea who that man was, but he knew one thing for sure: they were no longer safe. Harris kept pace with him, her breathing sharp and erratic. She was just as shaken as he was, but she had the presence of mind to stay focused. "We need to lay low," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't trust anyone right now. The Watchers, they know we're onto them." Johnson nodded, his jaw clenched. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. Whoever these people were, they weren't just watching from the shadows, they were manipulating everything around him. And now they were coming for him. They found a nearby alley to take shelter in, hidden from the streetlights. Johnson leaned against the brick wall, his mind racing. "We need answers, Harris. Fast." She didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. "I have one person who might be able to help," she said, her voice low. "But we need to move quickly." Before Johnson could ask any questions, Harris pressed the phone to her ear. He watched as she spoke in hushed tones to whoever was on the other end. He could hear the urgency in her voice, but he couldn't make out the conversation. Finally, she hung up. "They'll meet us at the docks. We need to get there, now." Without another word, they began to run, their footsteps echoing in the quiet streets as they made their way toward the docks. The wind whipped through the air, adding to the sense of unease that gripped Johnson's chest. Every step they took felt like it was drawing them closer to something they couldn't control. A meeting in the dark. The docks were deserted, the fog rolling in thick and heavy over the water. The smell of salt and rust filled the air as Johnson and Harris approached the old warehouse at the far end of the pier. This wasn't a place for casual meetings, it was a place for deals made in the dark. As they neared the entrance, the sound of footsteps echoed from inside the building. Johnson's hand instinctively went to his gun, but Harris stopped him. "It's him," she whispered. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat. His face was partially obscured by the collar, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, gave him away. He wasn't here to help them. He was here to deliver a message. "You're looking for answers," the man said, his voice low and deliberate. "And you're asking the wrong questions." Johnson's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter the warehouse. "Come inside," he said, his tone unbothered. "We have much to discuss." Reluctantly, Johnson and Harris stepped inside. The air was damp and cold, and the dim lighting barely illuminated the space. The man led them to the far corner, where a small table had been set up with several old files scattered across it. "You want to know about the Watchers?" the man asked, his voice carrying an edge. "You're already too far in. There's no turning back now." Johnson crossed his arms. "Tell me everything. Who are they? What do they want with me?" The man smirked, a cold, unsettling expression. "They want power, control. They've been manipulating events for decades, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But they never expected someone like you to get involved. You're a liability now." "Why me?" Johnson demanded. "I don't even know what's going on." The man leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming. "That's the problem, isn't it? You don't know. But you will. And once you do, there's no going back. The Watchers will make sure of it." The revelation. Just as Johnson opened his mouth to ask more questions, a loud bang echoed from the door. Before anyone could react, the door burst open, and several armed figures stormed into the room. The man in front of them stood tall, unfazed. "I warned you," he said, almost to himself. The figures moved quickly, surrounding Johnson and Harris. One of them, a woman with dark hair and an icy glare, stepped forward and spoke directly to Johnson. "Time's up," she said, her voice cold. "You've been digging too deep. The Watchers don't like that." The warehouse was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of Johnson and Harris. The armed figures who had stormed into the room stood still, their eyes cold and calculating, scanning every movement. Johnson's pulse raced, his fingers twitching near his holster, ready to react, but there was no easy escape now. Harris, standing beside him, seemed as frozen as he was, but her eyes were alert, scanning the room for any possible advantage. She had always been resourceful, but even she knew this was a dangerous situation. The woman who had spoken, dark hair and a steely demeanor, stepped forward, her eyes locked on Johnson. "You've been warned," she said, her voice ice-cold, devoid of any emotion. "But now, it's too late. You've crossed a line you can't uncross." Johnson clenched his fists, trying to steady his breath. "I don't even know who you people are. Who the hell are the Watchers?" The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. "Oh, you're learning, aren't you? The Watchers are not just a group of criminals or conspirators. We are the ones who control everything. The governments, the corporations, the news, it's all part of a much bigger game, a game you don't understand yet. But soon, you will. Johnson felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The truth was starting to emerge, but it was more terrifying than anything he had imagined. You're in way over your head, she continued. The moment you struck Malik Al-Fayed, you became part of a much larger story. A story you weren't meant to know. But now that you do, there's no going back. A desperate gamble. Johnson's mind raced as the woman's words sank in. Everything he thought he knew about his job, his life, it was all a lie. Malik Al-Fayed wasn't just a random suspect, he was a part of something much bigger. The Watchers weren't just some rogue criminals. They were a shadow government, controlling every aspect of society from behind closed doors. How do you expect me to just sit back and let you control everything? Johnson demanded. What exactly do you want from me? The woman stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. We don't want anything from you, Johnson. We never did. You were never supposed to find out about us. But now that you've come this far, you'll need to make a choice. A choice? Johnson repeated, confused. She nodded slowly. You can either walk away and forget everything you've learned, or you can face the consequences. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it will get. But make no mistake, if you choose to fight us, you won't just be fighting for your life. You'll be fighting for everything, everything you know. And we will make sure that you lose. Harris took a step forward, her eyes fiery with defiance. And if we choose to expose you? What then? The woman's smile faded. If you choose to expose us, you will be erased. Gone. No one will remember your name, your face, your existence. We control everything. Your fight is futile. Johnson's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let this happen. Not now, not after everything he'd learned. But the fear in the woman's eyes told him that she wasn't bluffing. If he didn't take action, they would be swallowed whole by this system. Harris whispered, We can't back down, Johnson. We've come too far. Johnson nodded, his resolve hardening. What's the plan? The woman chuckled darkly. There's no plan. There's only the reality. The world you know is an illusion. And you are just one more pawn in the game. A sinister offer. Just as Johnson prepared to make his next move, the woman raised her hand, signaling her team to step back. They lowered their weapons, but the tension in the room didn't subside. Tell me something, the woman said, her voice softer now. What do you think will happen if you expose us? Do you think the world will suddenly wake up? Do you think people will believe you? Johnson remained silent, staring her down. He didn't know what to say. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how deep the Watchers' influence went. These people controlled the media, the government, the very institutions that shaped society. Exposing them would be impossible, unless they were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. We can make a deal, Johnson, the woman continued, her eyes narrowing. You don't have to go to war with us. You can join us. We can help you achieve your greatest ambitions. Power, control, influence, it can all be yours. Johnson felt a jolt of revulsion. You think I'd join you? After everything you've done? Think about it, she said, her tone persuasive. The world is built on power. Those who have it control everything. You've seen the cracks in the system. You've felt the chaos. Why not use that power for yourself? All you have to do is align with us. We could offer you a place at the top. You'll never have to struggle again. Harris stepped forward, her eyes burning with anger. We're not interested in your deal. We're not going to join you, and we're not going to stop until we bring you down. The woman's smile returned, but it was colder now. That's your choice, then. Just remember, everything you've seen, everything you've learned, it's already too late. The betrayal. Before Johnson could respond, the room erupted into chaos. The warehouse door slammed open again, and a group of armed men rushed in, their weapons drawn. Johnson's hand instinctively went to his gun, but before he could react, a sharp pain shot through his chest. He gasped, looking down to see blood soaking through his shirt. What the hell? Johnson's mind reeled as he staggered backward, his vision blurring. He tried to keep his balance, but his legs gave out beneath him. Harris screamed his name, rushing to his side, but the attackers were too fast. They pulled her away, pinning her to the ground, and she fought back, kicking and struggling to break free. You shouldn't have crossed us, Johnson, the woman said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You had a choice. But now you've sealed your fate. As Johnson's body went numb, he realized the horrible truth: the Watchers weren't just pulling the strings. They were everywhere, in every corner of the world, manipulating everything in their path. There was no way out. Not for him, not for Harris, and not for anyone who dared to stand in their way. The world around him seemed to spin as he struggled to stay conscious. He could hear Harris's voice, faint and distant, shouting at him to stay with her. But the pain was too much, and the darkness closed in around him. Before he lost consciousness, he heard the woman's voice one last time. You should have joined us, Johnson. Now, you're just another casualty of the game. A new reality. When Johnson woke up, everything was different. His body ached, and his head throbbed with pain. His chest still burned from the bullet wound, but something was worse. Something had changed in the way he saw the world. The woman's words echoed in his mind. He was lying in an unfamiliar room, bare walls, dim lighting, and no windows. His hands were bound to the chair he sat in. Harris was nowhere in sight. As he struggled to free himself, a door creaked open, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. It was Harris. She was bruised, battered, but alive. And her eyes, they weren't the same. Her gaze was cold, distant. When she saw Johnson, she didn't rush to him. She didn't call out to him. Instead, she stared at him with an unsettling calm. Johnson, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, it's time to accept the reality. We're on the same side now.